Today we're going to learn how to factor using common factoring. Now let's review what factoring actually is. If you look on the left-hand side, we have a 3 in front of the bracket. That means we're going to multiply everything inside the bracket by the 3. So 3 times x is 3x, and 3 times positive 3 is positive 9. So this multiplication of the question is called expanded form. What we're going to do is the opposite. We are going to do the factored form. So basically in today's homework questions, you're going to be given questions that are in the expanded form, and you are going to put it back into the bracket, which is called the factored form. Now common factoring can be done by using the GCF. Now GCF stands for the greatest common factor, so you find that and then you divide each term by it. Let me show you how that's done. So here is our first question. Step 1 would be to find the greatest common factor. So let's look at the coefficients of the terms. We've got 3 and we've got 6. So you're going to find the biggest number that can be divided into 3 and 6 without giving you a decimal. So that would be 3, because 3 can be divided into 3 and 6. Now let's look at the variables. Notice both terms actually have an x. So x is going to be part of your greatest common factor. And you go for the x with the smallest exponent. In this case, it's just a plain x, because that's actually exponent of 1. So let's put that in our greatest common factor. Okay, so step 1 is done, and I'm just going to write that here on the side. Now step 2 is to divide each term by the greatest common factor. So we put an equal sign and the greatest common factor and then a bracket, and now we're going to divide each of the term by the 3x. Let's start off with the first one and divide this by 3x. Now 3 divided by 3 is just 1. Now let's move on to the variables. So we've got to do x squared divided by x. Now x squared divided by x is just plain x. But why is that the case? Well, the bottom x actually has an exponent of 1. And when you are dividing same bases that have exponents, you're subtracting the top exponent from the bottom. So 2 minus 1 is just x to the power of 1, which is the same thing as just x. So 3x squared divided by 3x is 1x, but we don't have to write 1x, just x will do. Okay, now let's move on to the second term, the 6x. So let's divide the 6x by the greatest common factor, which is 3x. Now, positive 6 divided by positive 3 is just going to be positive 2. So let's write that down. And now let's do x divided by x, which just happens to be 1. And why is that the case? Let's actually review that. So again, both of the x's have an exponent of 1. And when you're dividing bases that have exponents, you're basically subtracting the top exponent from the bottom. So 1 minus 1 is x to the power of 0. And anything to the power of 0 is always going to be 1. So 6x divided by 3x is just 2. Okay, so now that we have that as our answer, let's close the bracket. And that's our answer. Now, how do you know that you actually have the correct answer? How do you know you haven't made a mistake? Well, there's actually a way to check this. So let's do that. So to do the check, you're going to multiply your answer out. So let's start off with the 3x and multiply with the x. Now, 3x times x is going to be 3x squared. Now let's multiply the 3x with the positive 2. So positive 3x times positive 2 is going to be positive 6x. Now do you notice something here? Notice that our check answer is basically the same as the original question. When your check answer is the same as the original question, that means you actually have the correct answer. So our final answer for this question is actually 3x bracket x plus 2 close bracket. On to our next question. Now step 1 is to find the greatest common factor. So let's look at the coefficients. We've got 20, we've got 15, and we've got 30. So let's find the biggest number that can be divided into 20, 15, and 30 without giving you a decimal. Let's see, what can be divided into 20, 15, and 30? That would be 5. Okay, now let's look at the variables. Notice all 3 terms have an x. That means x is going to be part of your greatest common factor. And you always go for the x that has the smallest exponent. In this case, it's this one. It's actually a 1. So we're going to put the x beside the 5, and 5x is our greatest common factor. Okay, step 1 is done. Now step 2, you're going to divide each term by that greatest common factor. So let's write that down. Greatest common factor is 5x and then bracket. Now let's start off with the first term. 20x divided by 5x. Well, 20 divided by 5 is just 4. And let's see. We've got x divided by x. That's just going to be a 1, so you don't have to write that down. Now let's move on to the next one. 15x squared divided by 5x. Well, positive 15 divided by positive 5 is just positive 3. So let's write that. Now x squared divided by x. Again, let's do a recap of this. Now, when you are dividing bases with the same exponent, you take the top exponent and subtract it from the bottom one. So x2 minus x1 is just x to the power 1, which is the same thing as x. So we're going to put the x beside the 3. So 15x squared divided by 5x is 3x. Now the last term, negative 30x cubed divided by 5x. Now negative 30 divided by positive 5, well, that comes to negative 6. Okay, now let's focus on the variables. X cubed divided by x. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to subtract the exponents, the top exponent from the bottom. So really, x3 and the bottom exponent actually happens to be 1. So 3 minus 1, which happens to be x to the power of 2. So let's put that beside our answer of negative 6. So it's going to be x squared. Close the bracket, and there we have it, our answer. Now again, how do you know this answer is correct? Remember, you can check it. So multiply everything out. All right, so let's do that. So let's start out with the first one. 5x times 4. Now 5x times 4, that comes to 20x, okay? Now let's multiply the second. 5x times positive 3x. That comes to positive 15. And remember, x times x is x squared. Now 5x times negative 6x squared. 5 times negative 6 is negative 30, and x times x squared is x cubed. Again, notice our answer here with the check is basically the same as the question that we started off with. That means we actually got the right answer. So our final answer is going to be 5x brackets 4 plus 3x minus 6x squared, close the bracket. On to our third question. By now you know we find the greatest common factor first. So let's look at the coefficients. We've got 16, 24, and 28. What big number can be divided into all three of them? What about a 2? That can work, but it's not the biggest number. 4 is actually the bigger number. So that's going to be part of our greatest common factor. Now notice all of the terms also have an x, so you have to put an x there. And we go for the x that has the smallest exponent, which is just the plain x. Okay, so let's put that beside the 4. Now notice all of the terms also happen to have y. So we've got y here, and y here as well. So once again, we go for the y with the smallest exponent, which is the last one right here, a plain y. So we're going to put that beside the x. All right, so our greatest common factor happens to be 4xy. All right, so second step, we're going to divide each of the term by this greatest common factor. So we start out by writing equals the greatest common factor, which is 4xy, close the bracket, and now let's start dividing. So let's divide the first term by 4xy. Now 16 divided by 4, they're both positive, is positive 4. Now let's look at the x's. X divided by x just happens to be 1. Okay, so now let's move on to the y's. So we've got y3, and notice the bottom y does not have an exponent. That actually happens to be a 1. So we're going to take the top exponent, y3, minus the 1 at the bottom, 1. So 3 minus 1 is y to the power of 2. So the answer for the first term is 4y squared. Now let's do the second term and divide that by the greatest common factor. Now negative 24 divided by positive 4, that would happen to be negative 6. Now let's focus on the x's, x to the power 2 and x to the power 1. So again, we are going to be subtracting the top exponent from the bottom one. So x2 minus 1 is x to the power 1, which is the same thing as x. So let's leave that there. Now let's focus on the y's. We've got y2 divided by y, or y to the power 1. Now again, when you're dealing with the exponents, you're subtracting the top exponent from the bottom, which happens to be y to the power 1, same thing as y. So let's put that y beside it. Okay, so that term is done. Now let's move on to the third one. So now let's divide this by 4xy. Now the coefficient, 28 divided by 4. So they're both positive, so your answer will be positive 7. Now the x4 divided by x. Again, when you're dividing it, you're actually subtracting the exponents. So 4 minus 1 is x to the power of 3. So let's put that there. And last but not least, y divided by y. Well, as you know, they're both exponent 1. And when you subtract 1 minus 1, that happens to be y to the power of 0, which anything to the power of 0 is always 1. So now we have our final answer right over here. So far, we've been finding the greatest common factor. But what if you do find a number that can be divided, but it's not the biggest number? Let's take this question as an example. Now, would 2 go into 18 and 36? Yes, but it's not the biggest number. What about 3? Yep, that can be divided into 18 and 36, but that's not the biggest number. How about 9? Believe it or not, that's still not the biggest number. 18 can actually be dividing by both of them. And because both of them have an x, x would be part of the greatest common factor. So really, 18x is your greatest common factor. So you would do 18x, and then draw a bracket, and divide this by 18x, which would come to plain x. And the second term, you would divide by 18x, and that would come to positive 2. So that would be the proper method. So I'm just going to put that correct answer on the right-hand side. Now suppose you thought the greatest common factor was actually 9 and not 18. Well, we can still arrive at the same answer. Let me show you. So we would take the 9x and divide the first term by 9x. So 18x squared divided by 9x is 2x. Okay, on to the second one. 36 divided by 9x is just positive 4. Close the bracket. Now wait a minute. This is not the same answer as what we have. Well, there's a reason for that, because you can still factor the stuff inside the bracket. Notice 2 and 4 can both be divided by 2. So the greatest common factor between the two is actually a 2. So what you're going to do, you're going to take that 2 and take it outside of the bracket. And when you take it out, meaning you're factoring it out, you're going to have to multiply with the 9x that's already there. So 9x times 2 is 18x. Okay, and then we put a closed bracket next, right over here. And now we're going to divide both of the terms by the greatest common factor, which was 2. So 2x divided by 2 is x, and positive 4x divided by 2 is 2. Now notice we finally have the same answer. So you can still get the same answer by finding a lower number, but you just have to keep factoring it until you cannot factor anymore. So now try the worksheet I've given you, and if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. Bye!